I've got the new 15. No, not an iPhone 15. The UMIDIGI A15. What we have here is a phone that from a distance has all the styling cues of Apple's latest. It's a nice build from a distance. It looks like the latest iPhone with its rear camera module. It comes with a smoked TPU case. We have a red USB-C to USB-C charge cable. And a charging brick rated at 20 watts. While it's booting up, let's go over the hardware specs. It's a 6.7-inch LCD display, claimed 64 megapixel AI triple camera system, single bottom firing speaker, and a 3.5mm headphone jack, which is always good to have, even if you don't need to use it. The processor is a Unisoc T616 2GHz processor. This is my first Unisoc powered phone, so I'm interested in how it's going to perform. Battery is 5,000 milliamp hours, has Android 13, NFC. For the biometrics, it comes with a side fingerprint scanner and face unlock. Once booted, the default screen looks nice. Feels snappy so far. Let's dig into the details with my go-to app, DevInfo Pro. Shows that the model is designated as an MP33. The build of this Android is on July 2023 with a June 2023 security patch. If you're familiar with these types of phones, you won't be surprised that it most likely will not be updated. Display is 720p with 60 Hz refresh. The camera shows as a 15.9 megapixel front and back, despite the claim of 64 megapixels. Let's go over some of the settings that's unique to this phone. We have a smart key that you can program. Some major manufacturers call this the action button, but this has been around for quite a while. I really love this key, and I love how you can program it on these phones. Not sure why on a lot of mainstream devices with such a key is limited to what the manufacturer wants available to it, like a Motorola red button action key that's limited in many ways. I set it to do my usual, double press for a flashlight, long press for a screenshot, but I leave the single press alone because I trigger it accidentally too frequently. It also has a 3-finger gesture that you can choose to activate a screenshot, or you can swipe down with 3 fingers to activate the camera. I don't usually set these up. The default way of doing these things is easy enough for me. Smart Motion lets you answer calls with a specific motion, like hold it to your ear to answer the call, or lower the ring volume as you pick it up. There's also the lift to wake, which is in most phones these days. I find this as a good companion to the face unlock if it's fast enough. There's a memory expansion on these budget tier phones these days that are being pushed out now. It's swap memory and not as good as real RAM. It's like Windows virtual memory. 8 gigs built in is quite respectable these days, especially for a budget phone. If I actually needed more than 8 gigs, would I really be buying such a budget phone in the first place? Otherwise, there's nothing else out of the ordinary, so let's test out the biometrics. The side fingerprint is actually really sensitive and fast. There are times when I pick up the phone and it's already unlocked because my finger has touched the sensor. The face unlock works okay. You have to move the phone around a bit if it's not at the angle it needs to be. And as I mentioned before, if you have lift to wake activated, it's one smooth motion once you get the angle correct on how to hold the phone. Now let's get on to using the phone. I initially thought this came with a tempered glass screen protector because several reviewers on Amazon said it was tempered glass. But after a week of using it, a bubble appeared and it turns out it's just a cheap plastic one. I'm just going to rip this off. The display itself is not very bright. I ended up using the adaptive brightness set to the upper limits, roughly 50% in low light and 100% most of the time in any kind of daylight. The color is a bit off and everything seems kind of pale. I tried to adjust it with the display adjustments, but it never gets to the quality that looks right. For a budget device, it's forgivable. The display being 720p doesn't bother me much because everything is still readable. I'm not trying to watch 4K movies or even 1080p movies on a phone. So it looks fine for browsing, messaging, and even watching mindless videos all over the internet. Which brings me to the sound. It's not particularly loud despite its advertising as having a really loud speaker. In an outdoor environment, I usually have to turn it to the max volume. It's loud enough to comprehend in an indoor environment and not be offensive to others around you. But it could be louder. There are no sound enhancements or boosters on this phone. Speaking of sound, a cool feature on this phone is that it has a built-in FM radio. It doesn't even need the wired headphones to be plugged in for you to be able to pull in your local radio stations.
The vicious, endless cycle of blood and death, and even after the war, there will be Palestinians. There will be the
You don't need mobile data or Wi-Fi. It's great for when you need some free tunes or news. For the sound quality, it's hard to tell how it sounds on a YouTube video, but here's how it sounds compared to a Pixel XL, which has stereo speakers and also a single firing Ultiphone Armor 19 speaker. For the app performance, the TSOC T616 is supposedly a mid-tier processor, but it gets a D rating on nanoreviews.net. Let's see how bad it is or if there's really a noticeable difference in regular use. I'm going to compare it to the A15's predecessor, which is a G80 powered UMIDIGI A11 Pro Max. And I'm also going to compare it to my current daily driver, the Motorola ThinkPhone with a top tier Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. Here's how it handles opening apps and switching around different apps. Open AliExpress.com.
Opening AliExpress.
What's the weather in Death Valley?
It's 78 and clear. Wednesday, it'll be sunny with a high of 104 and a low of 70. With a high of 104 and a low of 70.
Open up the Amazon shopping app. Open up the Kindle app. Split screen also works. And here's windowed YouTube with split screen. 3 things running at the same time. It's not the smoothest, but you really have to be amazed that such a low tier phone can do this. Now let's try the video rotation processing test. On the software side, it comes with the typical quick step home launcher. You can have all your apps shown on the screen and you can arrange them to your liking or use an app drawer like typical Android. You also get a wallpaper changer, a dark theme option, and a beta status themed icon feature that gives it stylized icons for common apps. You can see that Gmail and Messages are themed, but they forgot to theme their own camera app. I know it's beta, but still, for things like stylized icons, if it's not 100% stylized, it just looks incomplete and cheap to me. So I'm not going to use this feature. This is a very basic launcher. It does have a limit on how you can arrange the icons. You either choose a 4x4 icon grid or a 4x5 icon grid. That's a lot of wasted space here, and even though it's a 720p screen, it shouldn't be this big and wide. Fortunately, like pretty much every Android, I could install my own go-to launcher, the Microsoft launcher. I get back my 6 icons home layout with a 5 icon dock. Despite the 720p display, it looks fine. As for the battery life, the 5000 milliamp hours lasts me about 3 days under normal usage. Now let's look at the camera, which is the typical weak spot for budget phones. It claims to have a 64 megapixel AI camera, but the reality is the default camera is just 16 megapixels. You actually cannot have 64 megapixels and use the AI. You can use the ultra resolution feature for 64 megapixels and the quality is noticeably decreased. There's an 8 megapixel ultra wide, and again the quality is decreased. I'm sure there are use cases for the wide angle, but I don't see the use for the ultra resolution 64 megapixel here. There's a claimed night mode with surprising outcomes as stated in their ad. But after testing it out, the surprise is that there's barely any difference at all, if any. Definitely not as dramatic as their ad claims. You also get panoramic mode, time-lapse, and slow motion. Video recording is only 30 frames per second at 1080p, 720p, or 480p for the rear camera. For the front, you can only do 30 frames per second at 720p, 420p, or at CIF resolution, which is 320 by 240. Overall, I find the quality to be good in well-lit conditions. But in low light, it's pretty bad as expected. Night mode could be considered false advertising in my opinion. Video is very basic and very bare minimum for 2023. So who should buy this type of phone? I find this phone performs well for $150 or less. It has ample 8 gigs of real RAM. The screen is a pretty big size and everything is readable and legible, although the color is a little bit off. The camera is better than some, although not really a high quality camera system, but I've seen worse. This is a good phone for somebody that doesn't really take a lot of pictures or is just a light user and needs a light, stylish phone with a big display.